stuck in this thing with the canopy down, and you know, it's not like they can have you fire up the plane so they can have engine power, you know. Yeah, so he was in there for like 2 hours, just, you know, it's like already 85 degrees out. Inside a canopy it's like 120. So what they do?
Lift it
No. So
oh, you know, and probably has
it's locked.
Yeah.
Yep.
It slides forward.
So what they do? Fire department had to go and cut him out. It's like a huge deal.
Then that pilot gets stuck in one in Langley.
Well, yeah, I mean, you get to cut up in that. I mean, they don't make those parts on eBay.
But they're all like that though. F-15 was pressure actually.
Yeah.
So once it ran out of pressure, you were hosed. But if you could get it to unlock, they had a system where you could get it to unlock. The 16 wasn't like that. The 22's not like that.
We supported the 16s and A10s at 2 different bases, and I don't know if I'm laying at 15, and I'm like, oh, you mean it's just one bin? Yeah. I could use the same bin for everything. They're like, yeah. I was so happy.
It is so nice.
Not that I ever had to pin anything.
Because you have like 13, 14 pins, depending what's on it.
And you had to like know exactly.
Yeah, like, okay, this one, the only thing that was different on the F-15 was the tail hook and the landing gear.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it, but all the other stuff was...
The A10 is the same way.
Well, good morning.
I noticed our class is disappearing.
That's traditional.
I noticed Mondays too, though. I mean, the first
Doesn't mean that we have fewer students. They're still enrolled.
Sound like
They just have started to realize, well, I don't have to go. I've got this to do and that to do, and my car won't start.
I'm saving it.
The snow is too deep. Well, that's not a good excuse.
There's always 3 or 4 that come
Coming
in
from Anchorage?
But I'm autopilot anyway, so one of my favorite little anecdotes was Sir Isaac Newton was, not that I'm anything like him, because I'm sane, but he was paid to teach Oxford, and the one time he went into his class and there were no students there, but if he didn't teach, he wouldn't have been paid, so he taught anyway. He continued to give a lecture to an empty room, which...
good practice.
And that's before they had cameras, so it's not like he was recording himself or anything.
When I worked at the airport, like you drive into like the parking, right? You swipe your badge, you know, for employee parking. And the first time you swipe, just like randomly, sometimes it wouldn't work. And my initial gut reaction was like, I was fired and nobody told me. You know, like, and I didn't know whether to be upset or not. And then the second time it worked, like, I guess I gotta go to work.
So, what day is today? Tuesday. So Thursday, just in case you didn't notice in the syllabus, our first test is due. Remember, I grade primarily on volume, so if you send me at least 900 words, that's an A. So don't worry about grammar, vocabulary, vocabules, sentence structure.
You know, I already don't worry about that.
And you can use those words too. That's all right. However, that's okay. But eventually an editor might come in handy. But I'm not worried about it because.
So, a question about that: can we turn it in at any point, or can we only turn it in?
Oh no, yeah, you can email it now. In fact, 2 people already have sent me their first test.
Okay.
Do you want it as an attachment, or do you want it in just the email?
It could be in the email.
Okay.
The only thing that could really screw me up is if you have a Mac or an Apple, whatever those weird computers are called.
One of those.
And if you send it as a Pages document.
Okay.
Because whenever I get those, I'm like, my computers do not understand what this is. So I can't even measure how many words there are in it because it doesn't break them up into words. It's all squiggly. It looks almost like Arabic, except I know it's not. You know, you can recognize, that's not Arabic. I tried to learn Arabic one summer, and actually I decided I'll learn Arabic and Hebrew at the same time. And I got up to Aleph, and I was stuck. That was it.
Better than I ever did.
Aleph is A. Because after that, then you have to go from right to left. And I was confused. Does the whole word go that way, or do you read the word? No, the answer is you read the whole word that way. That's the whole thing. Kind of a neat expression. From Jerusalem to the left, everything goes from left to right. And from Jerusalem to the right, everything goes from the right to left. So it's like all print heads towards Jerusalem, you know. It's false, but it's a neat expression. There's Hebrew and Arabic. I'm sure other languages in that area all go this way. I think Chinese can go any way it feels like. Pretty much down, though, I think.
I think that's a standard, but you can pretty much write it any direction.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
I think now, because they interact with Americans more often, they do end up writing books where it goes side to side so that people are learning English at the same time. It's easier.
Huh.
But I think the standard's up and down.
Yeah, I've been listening, you know, to the Vietnam series that's on PBS lately, right? And they have a lot of Vietnamese speakers with the subtitles, but listening to them, I'm just absolutely appalled. I cannot match any of the words, even names of things. And so I thought I heard the word tiger in one, where they used the word tiger twice, and I recognized a word that sounded like a little like tiger in the first use, and then when they repeated it, I was waiting for the word, and it never showed up. So I guess that wasn't it. But I'm not going to. Tiger, the animal, tiger. It was the North Vietnamese talking about being like wilder than a tiger, etc. That kind of thing. Vietnam. It's a place in Asia. We had a war there. It was actually a police action, not an official war. Okay, that's all fun. So let me take a quick look here at the blog, because is my website confusing to you? Do you find it okay? Oh, I've got some
I think it
things
works
set.
fine.
I think it works fine.
I don't really use it.
Because you
I
don't
go in
remember the question. So you don't have to go to the blog to check on the questions.
I guess if I missed a day, that's probably what I would do.
Yeah, that's also where I
Yeah,
post the links to the video in case, you know, like if you miss it. It's not a official hybrid course, so I have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to do that. But on the other hand, I think I make it pretty obvious that you could actually do everything without actually even showing up. That's
Careful.
Easy.
you know, no, seriously, because I post the videos and I've got all the assignments are due via email. There are things that you miss, I think. I think personal interaction is still a good thing. I mean, we get into, I'm reading a book about will robots take your job? And, you know, a lot of, I even talked to Mark Fitch, if you know him, and I showed him the book, and he says, "Wow, I can't imagine them taking your job." And I'm reading the book at that section that says exactly that. You know, that MOOCs, you know, these massive online open courses that are offered at Yale and Princeton and all those other, you know, the Ivy schools. You know, they're basically offering these for free. If you want credit, then you have to pay.
Yeah.
But you know, basically, you know, high caliber professors. I've watched some of them, and they're even more boring than mine. You know, I mean, because at least I have the camera right there, so.
Don't sell yourself short. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, you know, some of the MOOC courses, you know, I've watched them, and this is like going back 30 years. You know, the person just standing there using, you know, like, you know, an old-fashioned. forget what those programs are called, not photo, the slideshow kind of thing. And you notice I don't use that at all. I just freewheel it on the web, basically. But giving a basically boring lecture, you don't see the students, nobody interacts, no questions, it's just straightforward lecturing, and not really even a whole lot of pizzazz in the presentation. Another main difference is that the cameras are way back a distance, so it's not like you're even up close as you could be. So they're not really professionally done in a way that makes them really attractive to me, right? I can watch them and think, oh, so what's Princeton's philosophy department think are the highlights of Nietzsche or something, right? I could go watch that, and I can take some pointers and think, oh, that's not how I would do it. However, but they're cheap, they're free, or next to free, right? So, especially if the economy keeps going down, you're going to have people, if they're interested in courses, they're just going to be taking these. Why come here? So, I don't know, robots might take your job, even this one. And I'm helping out because I'm making all my videos are still posted on YouTube, so you can look up multiple versions of me doing this lecture today, actually, and they're all just as boring, actually, but the topic is interesting. How many folks have heard of Nietzsche before this course?
Vaguely.
Vaguely? No, not everybody? Haven't heard of Nietzsche? So then if I ask you the next question, what's your favorite quotations from Nietzsche? You're not going to have any? You've probably heard the quotations even though you're not putting them in the context of Nietzsche. For example, God is dead. Heard that one? Yes?
The abyss. The abyss.
The abyss?
As you stare into the abyss stares back into you.
Mm-hmm. The will to power. That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Probably heard some of those. A lot of single statements. But he's also famous for confusing the hell out of everybody.
Like that reading.
Yeah. Yes. So a first point I would like to make is that if you felt confused while you were reading Nietzsche, you're right there in the midst of everyone that understands him correctly, because all the people that think that they understand what he's saying clearly do not. Because he even himself says in one book, I forget which one, you think you understand me? How do you know? I think I'm just pretending to think this. I don't really believe this. So just because he's saying something in a book doesn't mean that that's like something you could take to the bank. Nietzsche thought this. He said this, but he didn't necessarily think that. So it's very confusing. It's almost kind of a literary thing. I think a real key to it, though, is to recognize that he's angry and he's ranting and not really making very much sense. Although he's coming from a particular perspective, which I think you can kind of gather as you read his rant, right? But he goes back and forth, and remember, by now the Europeans are, the educated elite Europeans that are into philosophy are clearly thinking in terms of a language that you can say one thing and then the opposite, and you're not contradicting yourself, because people will have to assume that you're talking about two different contexts. I am me, but I'm not. Not a conflict, because in some senses of the word, I'm certainly a self, and in other senses, I'm not, because I'm, undergoing change, etc. Right? So language is at that point where they no longer think of it as being accurate or describing a particular situation in such a way that that's the case, right? And there's no other opportunities for you to view it some other way, right? In fact, that it blossoms into the point of view that there's lots of different points of view that we're not even thinking about right now. You should be open-minded enough to think of those. Does that make sense? And he's talking about philosophers to some extent. That I think you all qualify as philosophers today. So as he's describing philosophers, he's describing. Now, of course, this is what 18. So he dies in 1900. This isn't the last book he wrote, but it's somewhere in the 1880s, right? The section we have is from Beyond Good and Evil, which is at the point where he's literally just laying into Christianity and just critiquing it left and right. And so he thinks of a dog as the best Christian because dogs do what they're told. Right? They're sheeple. It's not a word that he uses, but I like it. It's sheeple, right? And what he wants, he's also written a book that's very famous called "Thus Spake Zarathustra," right? Probably heard of that. Probably all heard of the music.
I've actually never heard of that. What is that?
Thus spake, in German, also sprach Zarathustra. So in an English translation, thus spake Zarathustra. And Zarathustra is the German version of Zoroaster, the Persian inventor of Zoroastrianism, right?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay. Well, let me play this though. This.
Don't worry.
Thus spake. Now, so I'll go right to the music as opposed to the book. So you've probably heard this piece. This is not it. Okay, here. This is it. This is the beginning of Richard Strauss's tone poem, which is really a symphony. You can call any of his symphonies symphony. Thus spake Zarathustra. So let me.
Oh, the Montrose, okay.
So this is 2001. So this is one use. It actually gets played twice in that movie. The movie was 1968, so I apologize that the Homo erectus, or whatever he was supposed to be. Doesn't look very realistic.
Tools. He's got tools.
This is the invention of the tool. Totally anthropologically inaccurate, I'm sure. Ravens have tools. Johnny learns to play. Then he learns he can be a meat eater, so. So he started having to worry about cholesterol. So. But that's Strauss is influenced by that tone poem. And did any of you get to watch this video. This is, I think, one of the most excellent videos I have
Oh.
posted on my link.
I watched this like 2 weekends ago. It's on Netflix.
In 1934, a photograph was taken here which epitomised the extraordinary influence of one of the most provocative and uncompromising thinkers of the 19th century.
It's an image of Adolf Hitler standing next to the bust of Nietzsche here in Weimar, where the philosopher lived. With chilling eloquence, this tells us what many Nazis believed, that Nietzsche was the brilliant mind, the inspiration behind the terrifying ideologies of the Third Reich.
Yet if Nietzsche had been alive to see it, he would have been appalled. His philosophies were being distorted by a
By the way, that's a
regime that
hypothesis.
stood so much that he'd have
Obviously, he
known.
wasn't alive during the
Nietzsche
Third Reich,
was one of the most dangerous minds
so no one
of the
really
19th
knows how he would have
century.
reacted to it.
Well, and just to fast forward to the end here, I mean, he spends his last 10 years in an insane asylum, and then the last few years essentially
Nietzsche
being a
lived
living
century in
museum
which Europe
for his sister to make
faced
money off of.
unprecedented change.
And she was the one that was a devout
Where
Nazi,
the authority of
and
Christianity
essentially was
challenged
selling his works
radical
to
breakthroughs
propagate
Elizabeth.
against redefining belief. And thinkers like Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche were suddenly free to unleash
I think
ideas
one of the
that
reasons he was so
centuries
angry
would have seen them
was
burn to the
because
stake.
it's really impossible to eat with a mustache
Yet
like
they
that.
heralded nothing less than the modern
No wonder his
world.
stomach was always upset.
You know what is interesting, and I'm just gonna throw, oh no, wait a minute, never mind. He died in 1900, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, because there was a lot of disingenuous feelings running around Germany after the First World War, but that would have been,
Well, philosophers that like teaching philosophy and want students to enjoy the readings and so on will tell you that no philosopher is really associated with the Third Reich because everybody thinks the Third Reich was terrible. Sunday, I was sitting in a session where we were talking about being respectful to everybody's opinion, and the one young man, so they're 13-year-olds, and the one young man said, well, but nobody can say that they're a Nazi, and we would respect that opinion, right? Right? But Nazi simply means National Socialist. So so today, if we're thinking in terms of who calls themselves a Nazi in our context, they're probably not the brightest individuals in the community. And they're angry. We could assume a whole bunch of things.
Sounds like the modern day Antifa.
So, but if you go back to the Third Reich, we typically feel like they did some horrendous things, but guess what? Everybody did horrendous things at the time. War creates that kind of environment. It was an absolutely fascinating book. I might have already mentioned it, but it's just recently come out, called The Taste of War, which points out that the reason Germany was in such a fix was because England was embargoing all of the food going to Europe, and Europe couldn't feed itself. It was primarily industrial, not a whole lot of food sources. The food sources came from outside of Europe, a lot from the Ukraine, but that they imported stuff. And guess what? Since Churchill wanted to strangle the growing Reich, he basically used the British Navy to keep all food from getting to Germany. And so Hitler's committee said, guess what, we estimate roughly 20 million people are going to starve to death because of what's going on, unless we could break the embargo, right? And by the way, Hitler had long hoped that England would actually be an ally. That's why Dunkirk, I'm sure, that's why Dunkirk ended up the way it did. And they never did attack Britain in force. They used only the insults, if anything, right? Because all along, and even Rudolf Hess flew to England to try to negotiate at a certain point, remember?
yeah, like 1942, early in the war.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was a real message from Hitler. I don't think, a lot of people think that he just was trying to escape everything on his own, but I think he was a real advocate for unity with England. So in a sense, from that point of view, Churchill has at least as much of the blame, but no one ever complains about how hellacious a person Churchill was. Churchill's held up as a hero. Right? The Russians think Stalin is a hero.
He killed
But he
3
killed
times as many people.
more people, than Hitler did. And it's pretty clear that at the meeting, Hitler has a decision to make, and he chooses, okay, well, we have to get rid of 20 million people. Well, we'll have to use a priority. So the priority starts off with the weak, the disabled, the mentally ill, the mouths to feed that are not helping, the country. And then he goes up from there, and including, of course, the Jews, the Slavs, anything that wasn't what he thought of as a Aryan, which is, by the way, their ethics regarding the ethnic cleansing that they used actually came from the United States. The United States was where the books and things of that sort were all written, and by the way, our policies were already very much in the same sort. We weren't killing people. Well, we were, actually. Not in ovens or anything, but we were killing people in the United States and not allowing people to come unless they were primarily Northern European, and so on. Even the Jews, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't allow the Jews. So there's, and the book that inspired Hitler to think about the Aryan race was an American author. I can't think of his name, actually, because we actually had people trying to figure out how we could use genes to improve our society by weeding out the weak and weeding out the right. We were actually sterilizing people so they couldn't have more children and so on. Are you familiar with that? So an awful lot of those horrendous things were actually a worldwide advocacy on the part of Northern Europeans that thought, only Northern Europeans are the true Übermensch, which comes from "Thus spake Zarathustra." And what is an Übermensch? Uber just means over. So Uber Ammergau, means the uphill side of the town, right? Instead of unter Uber, right? Over, same word, really, just German accent, right? But so an overman got translated somewhat into English as Superman, and that was very confusing because at the time of that translation, I believe that the comic book character Superman was already, and so the publishers didn't want to use that because people would confuse it with, the man from, some other planet, Joel, whatever is, right?
Well, and on top of it, the American Nazi Party was a recognized political movement, and fairly large, right up until the outbreak of World War II. In the U.S. There's all kinds of videos historic of Nazi parades.
Nazi
in
is
the
short
US.
for National Socialist,
Yep.
so it means you're concerned primarily about making America great again instead of everyone else. That's nationalism. And socialism, well, Trump is not for socialism. Socialism is health care for everybody, Social Security, Medicaid, those are
State
socialist programs, right? The Great Society programs of Johnson's era, and the social programs, social welfare programs of the Roosevelt era. So what's an Übermensch? Well, there's a connection with Darwin. Darwin is, remember he publishes in 1859, The Origin of the Species. Wallace was his competitor, and the two of them were kind of in a fight to get it published soon. But I also point out that this is really a part of the change in point of view that starts really with Hegel in his day, and that is that truth is truth in a context, and that context is evolving. So for Hegel, society evolves, and what's true today wasn't true 50 years ago. Society has changed our concept of truth about what we should believe, and so on. And so our society is evolving, and for Hegel, spirit evolves, and as that was published in 1807 and spread, everyone kind of picked up on the bandwagon and realized, hey, the earth is evolving, the plates and stuff, so geology, is born, right? Of course, biological evolution with Darwin and others, right, trying to figure out how various species have evolved and so on. Gregory Mendel, if you're familiar with him and his studies with peas, and how peas can pass their genetic characteristics on. A gene, by the way, is the same as Genesis, beginning, right? So, psychology, our psychologies evolve, right? It's odd, but if you look at specific kinds of pictures, one of the ones that I especially think of is Velázquez. I'll use this one. That looks all right. So, there's all kinds of interesting things about this particular painting, but if I'm interpreting it right, children look like small adults. Children look like small adults. That's not something that was new at this age. Heck, if we go back to what do we want? Medieval. So, this is obviously.
It's got receding hairline.
He's teaching, even. So this is an infant that's really ugly. Actually, she's ugly too. They obviously are not real good imitators of the human form. It's not realistic. And that's typical of all the paintings. By the way, notice, even the artists aren't ever mentioned. No one knows who's the artist that painted these specific paintings, because it's kind of just a trade. Or just kind of, this is exactly the way it's supposed to look, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that the concept of maturity, psychological maturity, evolves in our concepts today. It's absolutely basic to us. You don't expect a young child to know stuff that you would expect an older person to know, or behave that way. We would expect presidents to behave better than children, occasionally. Not call other people names. Well, maybe that's really good. Who knows? We'll see how history will deal with this. We're not at a war with Korea yet, right? As far as I know.
When you think about past elections, there's always been mudslinging, so it's not a new concept.
Yeah.
It's going a little bit further than just the election this time, but still.
Yeah, Rocket Man. North Korea feels like we've actually declared war on them because we called. I thought Rocket Man was hilarious, actually. And the picture that Fox News had of him, I think they deliberately made him fatter and uglier, in order to, call him Rocket Man. That's just, sorry. I think it's fascinating. I didn't vote for Trump, but I'm absolutely fascinated with everything he does. I think it's absolutely amazing. But so, our sense of maturity evolved, and I think you could see that somehow before this period, people thought that children were like little adults somehow. Doesn't seem possible. I mean, because kids are kids, so I don't know how could they have thought like that. Is that realistic? The universe evolves. So Einstein's theory is the relativity thing, right? You know, the universe is expanding. It's not a static universe where everything remains in its particular place, right? That was what Newton thought, apparently. So Newtonian physics, everything's, you could draw straight lines, parallel lines don't cross. Now, of course, we have space is curves. So there are plenty of places where parallel lines actually cross. Other places where they go farther apart. All kinds of spaces expanding. So the universe isn't steady. So it's changing. And so you could go across weather. All that stuff. Everything today we view from this particular paradigm, which has a starting place in Western European history, roughly around the 1807 time period that Hegel writes the phenomenology. And in that sense, the Übermensch is an evolutionary development of human beings. You're not merely mortal or merely human. The individuals that are merely human, biologically, no difference. So Nietzsche isn't arguing that the Übermensch is biologically different than other humans. And in fact, all Übermenschen begin as a regular person maturing, but at a certain point they become philosophers of the sort that you are today. You all naturally become that because our society has become the way it is, the way he sort of predicted it, we can say, right? And what that means is that you are no longer sheeple. You're no longer going to grow up and have authorities tell you this is the truth and you believe it. You're expected to be a critical thinker and think for yourself. And what he's describing in this text is how that is going to change our morality, because the morality is part of what the authority is telling you to believe, right? And by the way, he also in this piece describes how morality used to be different. It used to be the way it is now, where everybody had to think for themselves, but then it became a situation where the authorities, the religious authorities, dominated cultures and imposed those religious moral points of view, which made everybody behave that way and think that that was the truth, right? But because of the turn that's going through modern philosophy at this point, what we might even call postmodern, people look back and when the priest tells you Jesus said such and such, you think, we don't even know what Jesus said. Plus, anything that you tell me is actually your interpretation based on the interpretations you've heard, based on the interpretations that they made up, based on the interpretations of hundreds of years, 1,000 years, right, plus, of interpretations, changed languages. No one knows what Jesus was really thinking. Who the heck even thinks he's God? It's not even clear that Jesus thought he was God. What we have is Paul telling people that Jesus was God. Paul never even met him. So we can be very critical of the religious authorities that tell us that they know what God wants us to do and how we should behave. Same thing with Islam. Same thing with any of these religious points of view. As a young person today growing up, and he was in 1860, 1870, 1880, 48 years altogether, I think, right? But that's the way our society has become. There weren't that many in his day that grew up this way. But in our society, how many of us as Americans grow up with the belief that you should think for yourself, be a critical thinker? How many of you, raise your hands, how many of you are independent thinkers? It's hilarious, isn't it? We all, we're all independent thinkers. How many of you feel like you're free agents? You make your own free decisions. That's our dogma today, right? That's our authorities keep telling you. You're a free person. You have to grow up to make your own decisions. By the way, I recommend this. So, in a sense, we're all Ubermenschen. I mean, I think you naturally grow up in a society, in a community, in a family, if you're lucky, where the family has a set of moral beliefs and take you to institutions, perhaps, where you are inculcated in these beliefs. By the way, I think young children absolutely need that. I don't think you can get to the point where you can be now told, okay, now you're a free thinker, unless you've had some sort of moral basis to start with. Psychologically, I don't think you can just not study numbers and then all of a sudden be told, okay, so now you can do math. Now it's for, you can do math on your own. No. Well, what is math, right? You have to have a moral basis on which to feel like there's a crisis in morality. And the crisis isn't in the people that believe in these authoritarian regimes of morality. I didn't have a crisis when I was a Roman Catholic growing up as a kid. The priest said, da 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 da, and and every Saturday you should go and confess your sins. And I remember going to the confessional, lining up with all the other little kids, trying to think, what sins do I have to confess? So I said things like, I lied to my mother 500 times. I don't think I ever lied to my mother, actually. But you had to come up with something, what kind of sins could you imagine doing, at the time? The priest said, send 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers. Next person, in a little door. And you get up and you go up to the altar rail. It was always so cool on your head, so felt nice actually putting your head on the altar rail and saying your 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers, and you actually felt better. You were ready for heaven if anything happened, at least till next Saturday. I mean, you grow up and you realize that's all bullshit, right? But if all of our trained morality comes from these regimes, these authorities, which are historical, and by the way, we absolutely have a state religion. Because when you're forced to go to the public school system, and the public school system is forced to teach you history is social evolution. I would sub on the various schools in the school district. I remember one of the classes doing the Constantine the Great, on how he unified the empire again, and how he called on a council, how he conquered in this sign, with the cross, etc. And he called the Nicene Council. I mean, this was in social studies, history, right, in the textbook, and it was absolutely clear that the textbook was describing these decisions on what Christianity meant as human, individual, people in this council voting and arguing with one another about what it meant to be a Christian. And so the whole idea in high school, sophomore year, I think, was that religion is historically evolving, man-made. That was in the textbook. Right? Is that right? Is that the impression you got when you were going through high school? Of course, then you come out of high school and you hear the priest telling you, this is what God has said, etc. You think to yourself, man, in high school, I just learned that that was all bullshit. So the smart ones, of course, begin feeling upset. I remember seeing one young lady in a class. She came up to me after class and she was literally shaking. She was so anxious about asking about this kind of stuff. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know who to ask. But in her mind, she was absolutely confused about how what school was teaching her was in conflict with what her family believed and professed every Sunday, right? So she wanted, but she didn't know who she could go to ask those kinds of questions. And being in a high school, you're really not totally wrong to start telling her more advanced stuff because you get fired, number one. Actually, I was fired eventually. But it was for another thing. But that was interesting. I quit because it was a matter of, I had obviously said some things in one of the classes that wasn't what the teacher asked the sub to do. And I was using a syllabus I found on the web for that particular topic. But it was just, I had done it for 3 years. And I was full-time at UAA too, so I thought, the heck with it. I learned my lessons about why my students were the way they were. They saw where they were coming from. So that was pretty interesting. But so, thinking for yourself, not believing the authorities, is the crisis that he's talking about. Because it's not just you as an individual, it's our whole society now, essentially is in that boat. And so you yourself are frustrated because the minute you think that there's some kind of intuitive right, you have to question yourself and say, where did I get that intuition, right? In my notes along the page at this point, I think I wrote Black Lives Matter. Right? That's like, a current issue, of course, obviously, for us. I mentioned, do you think you understand me? How do you know? Says Nietzsche. So an intention morality. It's a prejudice, he says. It's become a prejudice. You've been trained to think this way, so now we realize, gosh, that's a prejudice. So if we're trying to get rid of all of our prejudices, how do you decide? All decisions are made based on a prejudice of what the right choice would be. And he's basically suggesting somehow we have to free ourselves from prior prejudices. Be free. That means there's no possible choice you can make. Right choice. No wonder he went insane, right? What do you think about this argument? Is this persuasive? Do you feel like he's talking to you because you're in that situation?
See, you say prejudice, and what I hear and what I think is perspective. Because we're raised with, maybe it's religion, maybe it's something else, that we're raised that perspective, so that's whatever we see, that's what we view. We go back to that whole, thing we talked about with ego and the screen.
Or true and false.
Yeah.
A real intriguing problem, right? I've mentioned that Western European languages have the verb to be. What we consider a true or false statement is essentially this is in this set, or this in this category. Or dogs are not cats. No dogs are cats, right? Well, apparently you can't say those things in non-Western European languages, or at least those languages that don't have the verb to be. So strictly speaking, other people can't speak true or false statements. Wow. Well, and I think you should. I think you should try to speak truthfully. I'm attached to the idea of reason. Apollo as opposed to Dionysius, right? Dionysius is Nietzsche's hero, right? Let's just basically have orgies. I think he wanted to do that because he never got to have one. But then on the other hand, neither have I. Sorry, maybe that's it's too much TMI, right? But you know what? Roman Catholics going to strict Roman Catholic schools, they don't even know what an orgy is. It never happened. And I got married primarily because I wanted to find out what all that was really about. Sorry, I guess that's TMI too. But when did Nietzsche get ill? Did he get ill at a certain time, or was he always ill? What was the softening of the brain that his father died from? Basically, everyone thinks that, okay, maybe there's a genetic problem, but it sounds an awful lot like syphilis, actually. And Nietzsche went to the baths with his friends on graduation. Maybe that's when he started having problems, because they didn't have treatments for syphilis then, and so on. So that could have been what he had, although his migraines and all sorts of other things were clearly issues for him too, which would really make you want to rant and stuff. And it also makes sense that you would feel really much better if you were way up in a cool mountain climate where there's lots less stress and you're just sitting in a little house up on the side of the mountain where he felt best, right?
It is to circle back to that perspective idea. Here he is preaching that you've got to free yourself from all these perspectives, from all of this, your thoughts being given to you, and then his work is being used by the Nazis so they can use it to tell people exactly that and share.
Yeah, this is.
Well, even if you yourself decide, okay, I'll follow this makes sense to me, then now you're under the perspective of his. Now you're under another prejudice. You willingly gave yourself, even if you're under the impression you shouldn't have any.
Yeah, I mean, he's essentially arguing for something that, at least in a human context, may be impossible to achieve.
There's some contemporaries that are kind of interesting. Madonna, in an interview, claimed to be a Nietzschean, right? She grew up Roman Catholic, Detroit.
Jewish for a while too?
No, Roman Catholic, I'm pretty sure.
No,
but then she became
converted later. I'm sorry.
That could be, maybe, but not because of, Madonna, in following Nietzsche, seems to be correct that what Nietzsche wants you to do is, in order to feel the life, the will, right? Remember Schopenhauer, The World is Will and Representation, was the book that really was significant to Nietzsche at one point, if you watch the video, right? Felt that the escape from the morbidity or the hellaciousness of existence occurred when you were dominating, when you, the individual, were being the Übermensch, when you were telling society what values to believe in. Not being one of the sheep following the values, but instead creating the values, right?
So taking advantage of the system.
Yeah. So I think I've mentioned, the artists, Roger Scruton talking about how faking it, it's kind of, we're in league here. I'm creating something that's really trash, but I'm pretending it's great art, and you, the critic, probably feel like it's trash too, but you say how absolutely wonderful it is so that people will buy it, and then they buy it, and I say how smart a critic you are, and we've got this kind of network of elite artists that are all selling the same crap, to the audience that's buying it, right? And what's the real thrill out of all this? Well, we are getting money for it. If we're successful, we're psychologically manipulating the others. And by the way, that's not just art. That's the stock market too, right? What makes the stock market go up and down? Psychology, right? If we're all convinced, this stock is going to go up, everybody wants to buy it. oh, blah, 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 and the price goes up. Oh, this stock's going to go down, and then it goes down. You know, winners, losers, right? The powerful people, of course, are the ones that kind of change that, so that they invest in it first, tell everybody, oh, buy this stock, they all buy it, and then they sell when it's at the high point, right? Buy another stock that's low and say, oh, you should all switch to this. And they're the ones that make out all the money, 20% or more, huge amounts of money. Ted Kennedy, I remember reading about him, that he was, in Congress, he created a committee that should investigate whether sugar is bad for us or not. And it so happened that he had no shares in sugar at the time. And of course, the committee was determined to find that sugar was bad for our colon and everything else. And so everybody started selling their shares of sugar. And so Kennedy bought it, right? Everybody moved to the pink stuff or Equal or something, right? And then he had the same committee, and he had lab studies done to see if those fake sweeteners were causing cancer. They had the famous picture of the mouse with the great big lump on its back. Oh, this, if you eat a ton of this stuff, it's going to be bad for you. And I heard, sold their stock and went over and bought sugar, and he became filthy rich, right? And at each point of this, it happened 3 different times. Is that irritating? Are you talking about the same subject? Yes? Well, holler. What are you? Did I intrigue you with something?
I'm just trying to match it with what's going on right now.
Yes, that's excellent. Yeah. I try that too because, of course, most of my investments are thanks to Fidelity. I don't even know what I just invested in high-tech stocks.
Well,
and I don't even watch them.
The stock market after the election is a great example. Trump got elected. Everybody's like, he's got a business background. Markets exploded. He hadn't done anything. He had literally done nothing official. And there you go. I mean, it's all perspective. It's all confidence in money, confidence that by this person being part of this system, whether it works that way or not, they think it's going to benefit them and increase business. So.
Yeah, it's psychology.
Yep.
So, the ones that really win are the ones that are manipulating others.
Or can
which is the Ubermensch idea, right? You manipulate the other people, right? You're taking advantage of other people. Madonna, in talking about this, creates herself. So she creates an image, and sells records, sells shows, and so on. But what Nietzsche says is if you allow your earlier decisions about who you are to dominate you for the rest of your life, your Ubermensch status goes away, because now you're being manipulated by those other people's expectations of you, right? So what you have to do is each step of the way is you have to recreate yourself, right? And create a different image so that people expecting you to be the material girl, right? Remember, material girl? Some boys hug me, some boys kiss me, I think they're okay, yay. If they give me proper credit, I don't turn away, yay. Because we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. Right?
And you didn't know Huey Lewis.
Well, that's kind of like what we were talking about, was we were trying to find out if, in our own heads, if that would also count for past expectations, not just the ones being held on you, in the
Absolutely. Because if you're just doing what other people expect you to be, you've always been such a nice person, and then all of a sudden you come in and you're an asshole. Whoa, I didn't expect that of her. Well, now you're not dominating the others. But, if you just came in as an asshole, of course, people wouldn't like you. And the important thing is to dominate them in such a way that they're even more impressed than they were before. So you have to keep coming up with a new self that's going to be even better than the one that was there before, right? So you have to keep changing who you are, you know, so you're, you know, the material girl, then you're the American girl, then you're, you know, what, I don't know, you know, go out, write a book, a children's book, go adopt children from Africa, go buy a British castle, you know, maybe not falling off of a horse to get public attention is a good idea because you break your hip, you know, but, you know, so, but she clearly says that her goal is to constantly come up with a new image so that she is becoming as famous or more famous than she was, making more money and everything else. But if you're not creating this new image, then you're no longer an Übermensch and you lose the thrill of that kind of psychological domination of other people.
So here's a random thing that I saw one time, and it was Warren Beatty and Madonna, because they were together for years, and it was an interview, and Warren Beatty at one point turns to the camera and goes, "Do you think this is who she is? No, she's acting now. She's always acting. That's who she is." And it's funny because that's exactly what you're describing.
And that's exactly what Nietzsche is giving us the directions. Do you think you understand me? How do you? I'm just pretending to think this way right now. Right? It's not really what I think.
But on the other hand, the more you change your image, the more rise and fall there's going to be with different people. So to me, that doesn't fully make sense because there's never going to be like an equal ground of, oh, this is more popular, because you're always going to have those people saying, oh, well, I like this one better.
Italy kicked her out at one point.
I think that's what makes it difficult, and that's what makes it so genius to do it correctly, whether it's Nietzsche or whether it's Madonna.
Of course, you might become more famous if Rome kicks you out.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, is I don't feel like there is like this correct way, because there's always going to be that rise and fall.
And you're making up your own new morality each step of the way. What's good art? I mean, shit rock, you know? You know, I mean, there's lots of uses of shit in art today. You know, artists have tried to be canned shit. You know, you buy your own canned shit of the artist. You know, wow. Well, no one wants it. It's not like you're going to open it and try it with your spaghetti or something, right? What you're thinking is, someday this will be so famous, someone will pay me $1 million for the can I spent $100 for, maybe. It's an investment, and that happens. I mean, you know, there was a fascinating 60-minute special on art, where the crew went to a art show in Florida that you could only go to if you had your own personal jet. That was the only way to the show, because you had to land in your personal jet on the runway where the show was being held. Right, so that automatically limits no riffraff are just going to drive down for the show, you know, in their beat up jalopy. You've got to fly in your business jet, your Learjet or something, right? And then you go and you look at the stuff, and the artist had the craziest thing. Remember the one that struck me as absolutely ridiculous was what looked like an IV pole from a hospital, complete with the wheels and the little thing, and the artist had taken a orange extension cord, fairly large, and wrapped it oddly around the pole, and that was the art. It was on sale, and millionaires, billionaires were looking at it and seriously thinking about buying this for like $100,000 or some goofy price. How gullible could they be? This is not, I mean, you could do that in your garage. You know, there were a lot of, a step ladder, little wooden step ladder, 3 steps, right, with the little top, paint all over it. Centerpiece of the art, right? 90% of the Americans I know have one of these in their garage.
We were talking about it in my appreciation class, there was this painter, his name was Barnett Newman, and all he did was he took this large canvas that was originally white, painted it blue, and painted a white stripe down it, and sold it for $48.3 million.
Exactly. Exactly.
I remember walking into a friend's house, they had at the entryway a canvas that had just looked like kindergartners put it together. This so-called painting or whatever with stuff glued onto it, trinkets and beads, and it's like, how much you pay for that?
Did they make it?
No, they bought it.
They bought it. Sheesh.
It was hundreds of dollars. It's like, man, I could have got that for you for at least a couple of dollars. Just had the kids in the
And
kindergarten
yet,
class
if you
make it.
paint a picture with like a pretty scene on it, mountains, leaves, because that's everywhere you look here, it's pretty as a picture, right? Now, if you paint a painting, make a painting where that's what I thought was trying to be a good artist, was being able to paint something that actually looked like what you were, that's what I thought art was. Well, that's primitive. You can't sell those. The thing that you're talking about, that's what can sell.
Because Happy Tree is just sad now.
Annabelle's art from the zoo, the elephant.
Yeah, we were buying her stuff, right? You can still buy her prints, I think. It's all psychological manipulation of the population. What else could it be? It's not like there is a sense of creativity, and maybe the sense that this can inspire something. I mean, I've seen some very weird things that are actually pretty intriguing. We've got that the blue tube thing that Alyeska Pipeline put on campus. That's supposed to represent kind of one of those Escher puzzles, where it doesn't look right, because the steps, right? Escher, right? That you go up the steps, 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 and you're at the bottom of the first set of steps, right? Right. So we have the blue tube thing. You know what I mean? Out in front of the one side of the library parking lot. That's supposed to be that kind of thing. Of course, it's a real thing, so it really doesn't give you that weird kind of impression, because those are not possible actually, right? Can't have water going uphill, 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 or downhill, downhill until it's at the top again. It's just, you can't have that. So in a sense, it's all psychological. What's important is that you keep coming up with more stuff, because the meaning in your life is that psychological manipulation of the audience. Not even the creativity of the art so much as the creativity knowing that this is going to manipulate them. So it's that psychological manipulation of the sheeple, that because of your advanced, evolved beyond the human and beyond good and evil, because good and evil are part of those cultural institutionalized belief systems. That's where those are defined. The church says this is good. Abortion is wrong. Don't do that. In another cultural sense, abortion is the smart thing to do, right? So good and evil. In the one context it's good, in the other context it's evil, and vice versa, right? But we're meant to doubt both of those contexts. We can choose for ourselves whether we want to be in the one or the other.
I guess I kind of find it ironic that in his philosophy, his thoughts, that he had to gain knowledge before he derived his own thoughts. Well, in that sense, is he already, I guess, violating his own thought?
It seems
His own
absolutely.
philosophy?
It seems absolutely the case.
Because
that
he did not come up with it on his own. He was
he's a
taught.
product of his times.
Right.
Schopenhauer inspired him. Remember, Schopenhauer was pessimistic, and Nietzsche and reading the world as will and representation was absolutely, this guy's describing my own mind, right? But at the same time, he was disappointed because he felt like it was too pessimistic. He wanted something to give life meaning. But his answer was this concept of the Übermensch, which basically takes advantage over other people. Which is why when I think of Hitler, I would think, you know, there's a side of Nietzsche that I think would have been absolutely thrilled with Hitler. Plus all this talk he has about suffering, shouldn't be trying to avoid suffering. It was one of his critiques of where he thought modern life would go, that people would want a life of ease and wealth and, you know, have chocolate whenever you want it, you know, all that kind of stuff. Good good health care, you know, all this nice house, comfortable chairs and everything. But Nietzsche thought suffering was an important part of being happy. And, well, that's because, of course, he was suffering so much himself, I think. But so, I mean, I'm reading him, I'm thinking, gosh, I've got all of the qualities that he condemns. You know, I like having a nice house that has nice fixed temperature. You know, I like having a back deck. I like the trees. You know, I like, you know, having time to sit and read and enjoy books. And, you know, I like, you know, all this stuff. You know, all that stuff. It makes me feel good. And he's condemning it. Because I'm being merely human. Well, hey, you know, I really like being human, actually. I enjoy good music. It's kind of interesting how he was tied into music, too. If you get the chance, if you haven't seen that video, it's really, really good. She is really good, by the way. And it's a series, by the way.
Netflix has got 3 of them. It's him, Freud, and Karl Marx. I watched Nietzsche and Karl Marx. And
Yeah,
they were
yeah,
both interesting.
she is really good. I hate
In
to, well,
1882,
I probably
one of
shouldn't
the
say it, but I also
greatest
think she's
minds
pretty
of the
sexy.
century predicted a
Just me.
crisis, one that he
Not
believed
overly
would be
sexy. It's
without
BBC.
equal on Earth, and which would be triggered by nothing less than the murder of God. God is dead, and God remains dead because we have killed him.
We no longer
What
need
was
the
holiest
concept of
and
God.
most
We've
powerful of
done
all
away
that
with it.
the world has yet owned has bled to death under our eyes. Who will wipe the blood from our hands? These are the visceral, challenging words of Friedrich Nietzsche. The crisis that he claimed was a wave of disbelief in Christianity that he predicted would crash through Europe. And the raw, brutal
And it
language
has.
that he chose to describe this death of God.
In England, there
is
are
a
more
measure
practicing
of
Islamists
just
than there
how
are
terrifying he
Episcopalians
thought the consequence
or
would be.
Anglicans.
For what Nietzsche saw with disturbing prophetic clarity was that without a belief in God, there was no authority for the moral values that had underpinned European society across 2,000 years. He was declaring our freedom from God, our mastery of our own fates. No longer controlled by divine laws, we were now liberated or condemned to create our own values.
So something I can mention here, I talked about the categories of the understanding that Kant gave us. Along with that, a very famous ethical concept of Kant's is what he called the categorical imperative. And what he means by that, roughly, is that just as when you see like a shape that's a triangle, you categorically know that that is a triangle. There's no cultural doubt or anything, right? So when we're in an ethical dilemma, you know intuitively what the right thing to do is, says Kant. Whether that's what you do course, gets into the consequence thing. For Kant, you should ignore the consequences and just do the right thing, even if it means pain and anguish, even on your part. You owe your platoon, to help them, even though you're under fire, right? So you go do it without worrying about what's going to happen to you. Gone. You just have to do that. Right? Whereas the consequentialists will say, oh, I'm not going there. Right? For Kant, the categorical imperative is what you know that anyone in that situation must do to do the right thing. It's a categorical imperative. The problem, of course, with Kant is he's embedded within a particular culture. He's been trained to think a particular way. So the intuitive right thing isn't some sort of universalizable right thing. It's a cultural thing that's been trained through this institutional process that raises you to automatically think this way from childhood up, right? And that's part of what Nietzsche is trying to free us from. As if there's some other way of having morality. And by the way, I'm 99 point persuaded that that's impossible. You have to raise people with a set morality from childhood up. And as you're pointing out, Nietzsche was clearly raised in that morality. And his rebellion against it is just emotionally earth-shaking to him and to others and to people that read him. It's kind of amazing to me. A lot of people read Nietzsche and feel like he really speaks to them today because we're living in a cultural environment where you're being taught to be a free thinker, right? So, and moral values are changing all the time. We fight over them. Should we have euthanasia? Should we kill criminals that have killed other people, right? Should shop owners be allowed to shoot someone running away with products, right? That's going to happen soon if the police don't somehow.
Already happened.
Yeah.
There was that business in, I think it was off of Minnesota, cigarette shop, where a guy came in and stole a carton of cigarettes, and the business owner shot at him as he was exiting, and they arrested the business owner.
Paper this morning goes on your right hand, so I mean, I don't know, a gunshot bullet, if you live, that's probably a better deal than getting your right hand or another
Right hand.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have someone write a letter, not me, to the newspaper suggesting, what's about Sharia law, Anybody caught, shoplifting loses the hand they grabbed it with. And if they come in and steal with the other hand, they lose that hand too. Maybe a foot, that way they can't run. Wow.
What's our question? Quiz question.
Yeah, time for a quiz question. What do you think of being an Ubermensch? Are you? Are you an Ubermensch?
Of course I am, for a writer.
Yeah, we're kind of culturally trained to be Ubermenschen today. We might not call it that, but just the whole idea of critical thinking, the imposition of evolutionary thinking in our school systems so that everybody grows up feeling like ethics evolves. I have to evolve my own ethics. What should it be? How can I manipulate other people so that I can make money off of them?
I think it's funny that we're talking to free thinkers, but we're not. Every time you have this system work where you're taught to be a critical thinker and you end up being one, when you actually exercise the use of that, you're immediately shot down and told not to use it. How dare you question your boss? That's not what you do.
Yeah.
I'm just being a critical thinker, you told me to. Not that way.
I was watching the Vietnam thing last night when they covered the Democratic Convention in Chicago. And all those kids were out there, basically being critical thinkers. You know, this is 68, 67, 68. And here they are, you know, all doing basically what their colleges have taught them to do.
I just wanted to ask you if you ever thought about the seven deadly sins and how they correlate with the seven continents.
Yes, there's actually a 7 continents. I thought you were going to say the 7 virtues, because that's what usually is talked about. The 7 continents?
Yeah. My mom made a statement while I was gone last week. She said that America is very gluttonous, and that I kind of go 1 to 60 really quickly in my head, and I was like, well, most of the continents can kind of cover a certain 7 deadly sins, couldn't they? So me and my mom kind of like mapped it out.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was just like,
What would China's deadly sin be?
It was more like North America, South America, Asia, and like just like the whole as itself.
What about Antarctica?
Yeah, this was.
Antarctica, we did, figured out, or we kind of agreed on wrath for, because it's kind of like
Just because it's inhospitable?
yeah, it's just there's nothing down there, and like for Asia, we figured pride. There's a lot of pride over in that area. But it was
Yeah,
kind of
why
like
Kim is so upset with our dearly beloved president
yeah.
is because he called him names, which insulted
Yeah.
him.
I was
can't-
That's
I can't get over the fact, though, that he can say whatever the hell he wants to anybody, and we just accept it. And then if we say anything back, now we're the bad guy. You know, like anything. I mean, how many times has he
love
threatened to
this whole
destroy
thing.
America
That
just
sounds.
last week?
Maybe you can make a painting out of it and sell it for millions of dollars.
I have faith.
Aim for $4.5 million. You know, and see that's better than a blue painting with a white line.
So for the first exam, we take that online,
Yes.
and is it due today or just open today or?
It's due Thursday, right?
Oh, that's right. It's Thursday.
So yeah, so
What exactly?
I have the exam posted. So here it is.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I didn't want to click on it because I wasn't sure if it would like.
Yeah,
oh,
in
you started it.
fact, some of these questions are almost quiz questions even. But
It's not the federal requirement.
like
Okay.
what things in contemporary art do you find beautiful? And a lot of people sent me a lot on that actually.
No, totally.
So that's
It's a volunteer organization.
the first exam, and it's due
The federal government.
Thursday.
But what it is,
Okay, and
hey,
do we
you're
just
not allowed
email that to you,
Just
or?
email.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. I was kind of nervous about it, but it seems like
Oh,
UA
it's
says,
good.
oh,
Okay.
well.
Is that
I'm gonna
okay?
make
You
sure
don't
we
mind
get
it
this
going
training
back and
so I
forth
can
over
show
email? So
No, not at all.
yeah,
So they're taking
there's
that
some
extra
FERPA
step, so-
things that email. Oh, you're not supposed to give grades over
At
email.
first I was like, I don't
You know
really
what?
email
That's
professors too
how
much.
I've always done it. Thanks, Phil.
I think it's better because like today I wasn't sure if I thought the exam was due today, and I was like, well, will there be class? Still haven't got my car looked at, so I was like, well, if I'm gonna take my mom's car and drop my dad off for work, I was like, do I want to
Thanks
do
for
all that
arranging that.
right now?
Yeah.
No, of course. And then Dad and I rushed here, and I was like, oh sweet, yeah, I know I was a little late, but
Yeah. Plus, I think I recorded the fact you just gave that whole narration, right?